So it's good to be jamming with you again, always. So it's been a
Yeah.
little while since we reconnected, and I feel like we've gotten to talk a lot in the last couple weeks, which is always good. Um, Before we get into your new book, I thought it would be kind of interesting because I don't think we've ever really talked about your journey of becoming a sales leader. And what I'm really curious about is when I was a rep, I felt like that stuff came pretty naturally to me. When I became a sales manager, that was not a very natural transition for me. I went from like being pretty good at selling to being really bad at my job for like the first 3 or 4 months. And the lesson that I learned, and the company I was working for at the time, they kind of mentioned this. It was something along the lines of your biggest strengths, because they come naturally to you, will probably be your team's biggest weaknesses, because the stuff that comes natural to you, you're probably not going to think about too much. But what was the transition like for you from, hey, I'm a seller, I'm doing great at this? Why did you decide to get into leadership? I guess would be the first question. And then what was like the first 3 to 6 months of that like for you?
Yeah. Well, so it was kind of accidental because my first
Mhm.
leadership role came at a startup, and I joined the startup when there was 20 people. And so there wasn't really a lot of hierarchy, or, obviously it was a small company. And then as the team grew, because I had been there from the beginning and I was a good
Yeah.
individual contributor, it was only natural that David should now lead a team to see if he could, transmit
Yeah.
some of the magic pixie dust on to other people. So it
Yeah.
wasn't like I was hired into a role that existed. It was just like, all right, we got to grow the team. And so David, like, yeah, how would you feel about, having some people under you? So it was just purely accidental.
Oh, interesting. So were you excited about getting into a leadership position, or did you maybe not even really know what it was and were totally naive going into it? What was that like?
I was excited. I mean, so I was, younger. And so I think when you are younger in any role, you think that progression and growth equals more opportunity and bigger deals and all this kind of stuff. So I was like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, this is great. Like I can manage people now. And your brain kind of tricks you into thinking like what got you here will get you there. And
Mm.
so, hey, look, if I just do more of the stuff that I was great at as an individual contributor and share my wisdom and knowledge, then, of course, I'm going to be a great manager, which is, I think, is the trap a lot of like high performing individual contributors fall into. But no, I would say like
Yeah.
I was excited to take on the leadership role and mentor others. The interesting thing though is it kind of over time, because I was generally young, like half my team was older than I was, and then half was younger than I was. So it was an interesting thing to manage people who were older than I was, had a lot more experience.
Yes. Okay, there's so much to dig into just with that. I'm curious though, as an IC, were you like were you the, for lack of a better way of calling it, you're kind of like, when I think of you like a sales, like the mad scientist of sales, right? Like you're
Hmm.
very into like the data, and you're very into, sitting, like the psychology of sitting in the seat of the other person. I mean, your first book is, Sell the Way You Buy. It's really like, it just embodies that concept. Were you like that sales nerd scientist when you were selling, or did it take a while to kind of develop that level of interest and passion for selling?
Yeah. Well, so the origin story was I started my career as a research scientist. I think we've talked about.
Yeah.
So like I got into sales by accident. So I was like a science and engineering, building computer models kind of guy. And I got into sales through an avenue that a lot of people sometimes don't think about, which is I was a solution engineer. I was a solutions consultant. So in a way, like I was on the sales team and I was selling, but I was very like product and solution centric. And so it was great. It's like I love talking about the product and solution, and I did custom coding for demos and so on. But being a research scientist as well, I kind of sat back and said, okay, like when I say it like this, their eyes light up and they get it. When I say it like that, no one cares and they kind of glaze over. So I
Yeah.
became very curious about like the pathways and mechanisms by which human beings make purchasing decisions, engage, don't engage. And so that was, as an individual contributor, what I brought to my role. And some of it was, I would say, and I talk about this in my first book, Sell the Way You Buy, it was like unconscious. You know how like sometimes you meet someone who's not in sales, but they're really good at selling? Like they could be a hairstylist, they could be a personal trainer, and they don't know, they never took a sales course, but they're so good at
Yeah.
sales because they know like the feelings of the other person. They have high conviction. You can feel and hear the passion in their voice. And gratefully, I was like that because I was always excited about what I was doing. And that was the thing that transmitted to my customers. But it wasn't until a little bit through the journey that I realized, like, oh, this is actually a thing. Like, that enthusiasm and conviction is a thing that not everyone has. And if there's a way that we can learn to systematically manifest it, then we can help other people be really, really great at selling. But yeah, so I was, you could say, like, I was naturally like good at it because I was just, it was functional, technical, good at the conviction, but I didn't know why I was good, just like the hairstylists and personal trainers. And over the course of
Yeah.
time, I kind of learned the trends and patterns and started to do things more on purpose.
Yeah, I could totally relate to that. Where you sort of naturally do a lot of these things, and because you pay attention to other people, you pick up really quickly on what makes someone lean in or not. And I don't know about you, I was just really good. I was good at sales at the beginning because I was really good at we had great training and I just followed the training. Just the frameworks. I didn't really know the why behind any of that stuff. And really, in your content, you talk a lot about the why and the principles behind things. So take us to, so you're a sales leader. That first 3 to 6 months, what was the hardest part of that job for you, if anything?
you know, I I was lulled into a false sense of security because I was in such a technical role that being able to, and I was good at what I was doing, just being able to impart that was a lot of
Yeah.
value, for my team. And, the idea of like coaching and transparency and kind of, trying to figure out how to protect and advocate for your team and how much shit you were going to shield them from that was kind of coming down. That wasn't as much of a thing because as from a company perspective, everything was kind of like up and to the right for like a long time.
Yeah.
And it was only when things started to get hard that the cracks emerged. And it's interesting because you're kind
Mm,
of seeing that now, not just in terms of leadership, but in terms of the sales profession in general. Like, unless you were selling at the
yeah.
turn of the dot-com boom or in 2008, the last few years have presented an amount of adversity that you've never seen before as a leader or a rep. And it's covered up some of the cracks in the armor, so to speak. And so I kind of got off easy for the first little bit of my sales career, because leadership career, because it wasn't as hard as it could have been, at that time. And also, it was, I'm trying to think back to the year, we're talking like, 2004, 3, 5, in that range. And
Yeah.
so I could argue that just the marketplace was a lot simpler than it. My
Yeah.
God, now that I'm saying it, it's like over 20 years ago, like,
Yeah.
like, yeah, the world has changed a lot since then, but also the world of
Yeah.
selling has changed a lot since then. And so I feel like I kind of got off a little bit easier, until things got hard, and that's when the challenges really emerge.
Yeah. That's funny because when you said that, I was 2003, 2004. You don't look old at all, but I was, a freshman in high school, I think, eighth grader. You
We're
know,
recording this.
so brace it, man.
I'm like a week or so before my 49th birthday. So
Wow,
I was,
that's crazy.
in my mid to late 20s when I was doing that. But it's funny because you see that now. So like, what happened was that company ended up getting acquired in
Yep.
2007, and the acquisition was bad. It involved like a lot, like firing, like a whole bunch
Mm,
of people at the company, a lot of turbulence, a lot of culture clash with the acquiring company. They weren't, the acquiring company, they weren't jerks or bad people or anything like that. It was just, as a lot of acquisitions go, turbulent. And I
Yep.
thought it was my job to just like put on a smiley face and keep everyone together and happy. But my team, during that time of adversity, felt that I wasn't being honest with them. Like, they said, they
Oh,
actually
wow.
went to a friend of mine, a mutual friend, director of marketing at the time, and they said, we see that David sees all the bullshit that's happening here, but
Mhm.
I know he's trying to keep it together for us, but we can tell like he's not happy with what he's seeing, and we just wish that he was
Yeah.
honest. And so she actually came to me and told me this in confidence, and I really took it to heart, and to this day. And so what happened? The culture of the team started to fall apart. People started to resign. I mean, maybe not just because of the team, but because of what was going on at the company. And my take-home message from that is, your team wants to know how you feel. When you're going into battle, you can't just put on a smiley face all the time. Doesn't mean you need to
Yeah.
overshare, but it's so important not to lose the trust of your team. And the trust of your
Yeah.
team is easy to have when times are good, right? When times are tough,
Yeah.
that's when you need to have the skills in place to really be a good leader, the leader they need.
Yeah, well, let's get into some of those. Let's get into some of those essential, sort of skills that you talk about in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like this is a pretty natural segue into the first one is promoting transparency. And it sounds like, and that's such wonderful feedback to get, by the way. Was it unsolicited?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Like,
Oh,
it
that's
was
so
interesting
cool.
because from a company perspective, think about it. We were all young. Our
Yeah.
CEO was like, I think 35 at the time. So we were all generally in that 20 to 30-year-old range. And we grew the company from 20 people to 700 people. And it was a $100 million run rate business by the end when we got acquired. And so we all grew up together. We all got married, had our first kids. Not, some people got married to each other, at the company. Uh,
Yeah.
but so we all kind of grew up together. So the bonds that formed during that time, like in the trenches, were really tight. So yeah, that was an unsolicited piece of feedback that I got. I'm grateful that I got it.
Oh, the unsolicited feedback is just, I don't know about you now in my career, and I suspect it will continue growing in this direction. I just am like hungry for feedback because that's the biggest thing that keeps you from growing and developing, in your role. Um, let's talk about this first one, promoting transparency, because it's interesting being a sales trainer, and you obviously can relate to this, and that you get to work with leaders in private, and then you also get to work with them and their team together, and you get to see and hear conversations around there could be all kinds of internal drama and politics that they might be dealing with on the exec team. There could be specific reps that they have trouble, kind of breaking through with. And you get to see all of this stuff behind the scenes that a rep may or may not ever really get access to.
Mhm.
And I think if any sales executive is listening to this, they probably relate with what you mentioned earlier around how transparent to be, what is sharing versus oversharing. You talk a lot about, providing the why to go with the what and getting the team to act with like greater purpose, which I love. But how do you think about the promoting transparency piece and the sales leader's role in promoting transparency? What does that look like?
Yeah, well, it's interesting as we go through the book, and there's these 5 skills I talk about. And just to back up, the way I kind of start the book is I say, Jason, tell me about the best sales leader you ever had.
Yeah.
Can you picture this person? People can usually do that pretty quickly. And I say, Jason, what was it about this person that made them the best? And they tell me all these things, and I go and I write them down on the board, and then I say, like, what kind of rep did you show up as for this person? Did you try really hard? Did you phone it in? Like, oh my gosh, I would run through a brick wall for this person, right?
Yeah.
And so all of the things that you tell me about this relationship you have with the best sales leader you ever had, you tried really hard, you would run through a wall for them, you'd fight to work with them again. And all the things they did for you fall into the category of they cared about me and they helped me grow. That's
Yep.
it. Oh, there's the thing. It's like popping up with a thumbs up. They cared about me and they helped me grow. That's it. Like they pushed me, they challenged me, they coached me, they were honest, they were transparent, they didn't take my bullshit, they gave me tough love, they gave me feedback. All of that kind of feeds into this like caring, and they help me grow. And so I tell leaders all the time, if you want to be the best sales leader your team ever had and get that discretionary effort out of them, get them to try the hardest and they would fight to work with you again, you already know what to do. Just care about them and help them grow. And so these 5 skills all fall under that umbrella. And to some extent, the way I describe them in the book, they're cumulative. So the first one around transparency, which we see crops up when we talk about some of the other skills, is all about providing the why to go with the what. Because if all I'm doing as a leader is shouting orders, do this, do this, do this, people are ultimately less committed to the result. So it's like, hey, Jason, you got to go into Salesforce, into the CRM, keep your opportunities up to date. Like, I don't see any next steps. And I could tell you to do all these things. Like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, old man Priemer's on me again to, update this thing.
Yeah.
But if I created a bit of transparency saying like, hey, look, Jason, like the reason it's important to update the CRM is because of A, B, and C. And I'm going to get in front of the board next week and they're going to ask me like, what does the revenue pipeline look like? And here's the story, Jason, that the current revenue pipeline tells me. And it says A, B, and C. And that's probably not accurate, and my job when I step into the board is to, give them a sense of confidence about where the business is going, but also to represent you because decisions will get made that will ultimately impact you. And my job is to protect and advocate, look out for you, and clear the roadblocks to help you do your job. And so the more accurate you can be in terms of updating these things in a real-time basis, the more it's going to ultimately help me, but also help you. And then I can go deeper. Like, here's what good looks like. And when I'm asking you to do these things, like, here's an example of what I mean when I say the CRM needs to be up to date. It really means these 4 fields need to be up to date every week. And And so, it comes back to this thing is like, whenever I ask someone to do something, if I said, Jason, here's what we're going to do. We're going to show up to work every day wearing a clown costume, and our revenues are going to go through the roof. Your first question is not going to be like, oh, where will I get such a clown costume, David? It's going to be like, why the hell would I do that? Right? So providing a sense of transparency. And it's interesting because I even teach this in my foundational selling practice, and I talk about this in Sell the Way You Buy. Transparency is even important with our customers when we ask them questions like, Jason, what's your budget look like? And who's going to sign this thing? And who's your boss? Like, whenever we ask people questions, we create this sense of uncertainty in their mind of like, okay, well, why is this person even asking? What are they going to do? When we create transparency, we help people act with more purpose. And that's why it's such a foundational and important leadership skill.
Yeah. Let's dig into a few examples if we could on this. And I'll give you one that I hear. And I'm curious how you might coach a sales leader with this. The number one thing that I saw it a lot during SKO season this year because I help a lot with outbound. And it was a VP of sales or CRO rolling out and really prioritizing pipeline generation and outbound for kind of the first time in their organization. And they did that through the form of, which I don't agree with, okay, everyone, there's a minimum number of outbound activities that you need to hit on a daily basis right now. And that number is 30 outbound activities per day. That's going to be X amount of emails, phone calls, etc. And as I'm listening to this, there's no context into why outbound, why that's beneficial for you as a seller to proactively go after business. There's no rhyme or reason behind the 30 activities a day either. There wasn't even, here's how we came up with the math. Just nothing like that. Do you see stuff like this pretty often? And if so, how do you advise or coach a sales leader around how to have a conversation like that with their org?
100%. Like, I think you kind of hit it when you talk about like using data. So it's like, hey, look, where did this number come from? Especially, when you start at the beginning of the year, giving reps their targets, their comp plan. And of course, there's always, no one's ever happy with the target or the comp plan. It's like, it's not like we did these things, we're doing these things to you to punish you. We came up with these things with a fair deal of scrutiny, hopefully. By the way, I've also seen a lot of organizations that pick numbers out of thin air. And it's very difficult to inspire confidence in your team when there was no rigor put into how these targets come up in the first place. But yes, if I'm saying you need to make X number of calls and X number of prospecting transactions a week, the reason I'm asking you to do that is because we did an analysis. And what we found was, given our current conversion rates, that's like, I want to prove to you from first principles why I'm asking you to do this and why this is so important. A great example that I actually share in the book, one of the sales leaders I coach in my practice, who used to actually be one of my reps back at Salesforce, so I'm super proud of this guy.
That's cool.
He had his reps kind of object to sourcing some of their own pipelines. So he goes out and he says, hey team, like, times are what they are. We need you to source a little bit more of your own pipeline. And they said, hey, but Jason, his name wasn't Jason, but say, hey, Jason, I know you're telling us to do the prospecting, but like, when we get these inbound leads, they close way faster than the stuff that we source from outbound prospecting. He's like, yes, it's true. And he used data to say, like, it is true that those deals do close 17% faster. However, the average deal size of a deal that you prospect on your own is 3 times greater than the stuff that comes inbound. So like, I'll take the outbound. It's a mix. It's got to be a balance. But I'll take that outbound stuff all day. And now all of a sudden their prospecting efforts intensified as a result of just explaining like why I'm asking you to do this thing. So the same thing happens with data. There's a perennial conversation I used to have with my reps at Salesforce, because you often have reps who'd say, Jason, I don't need to work hard. I just need to work smart. I don't need to make that many prospecting calls. Like, I'm going to just cherry pick the right people, reach out with the right message, and I'm going to be good. And I secretly root for those reps. It's my happiest day when you figured out how to work smart, not hard. But if I hadn't seen this at Salesforce, because I worked at lots of big companies, mostly smaller companies, startups, but never at the scale of Salesforce, then I spent 5 years at Salesforce. I used to run small business sales for the Eastern US. So I had, dozens of reps, thousands of transactions every month. And I saw that there was this unmistakable correlation between effort, calls, emails, prospecting, and attainment. And,
Yep.
I love the day when you tell me I get to work smart, not hard. But until then, Jason, I have like thousands and thousands of transactions that tell me that the harder you try, the better you do. And so when I say,
Yeah.
Jason, I need you to make these prospecting calls, I'm not doing this to you. It's coming from a place of like, this is what the data says needs to happen in order for you to be successful, which is what we all want.
Yeah, it's funny because you sort of alluded to this earlier. This idea that during sales, we are taught to talk about the why behind something. We're taught to use customer stories. And leadership is very similar, except for sometimes it's easier to get into a place of complacency where you just figure I'm the person's boss. I'm just going to tell them what to do and they should do it without giving them the why, without telling stories, etc. So love that piece. So promoting transparency. Second one, I'd love this one. Protecting and advocating. So demonstrating to your team that you have their back, create a circle of safety, and using this as a way to really build that trust with the team. Um, let's talk about emotional safety. And again, I'll give you another example of something I saw on a call where there was a VP of sales and there were 6 of their managers on the call. And when someone had brought up an idea around something or questioned something, the VP of sales reacted in a very, I don't even think it was on purpose, just a very heated, aggressive way where they were, if you looked at a transcript of the call, saying the right things, but their tone and demeanor was just, it shut the entire room down. It was a very awkward moment for me, actually, too. And I see this in many organizations where there is not emotional safety and people want feedback. Or the sales leaders say that they want feedback, but they don't get it because it doesn't feel like a very safe environment for someone to share feedback. And I know feedback is another one of the skills, but related to protecting and advocating, how do you think about creating emotional safety and like why is that important as a leader to do that for the people that work for you?
It's such a primitive, foundational feeling that we have, safety and security. Simon Sinek does a fantastic job talking about this in his TED Talk, Why Good Leaders Make You Feel Safe. Amazing talk. And it goes back to like, in the prehistoric days when we were all cave people and we're crowding around the fire and we relied on our leaders to look after us while we slept so that we
Yeah.
wouldn't get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger in the middle of the night. Like it's that level of,
Yeah.
of reaction that we have to protecting. And when we clear roadblocks, and we know this from science as well, like when individuals who are put under like MRI scanners recount leaders who are unempathetic and not caring, the parts of their brain associated with aggression and avoidance light up, right?
Mm.
Versus when we recall leaders who were humble, who cleared roadblocks for us, we report positive feelings, going above and beyond the call of duty, greater creativity, more discretionary effort. So it's actually quite a very primitive emotion. And there are lots of examples. One of the things that like a simple example is I say like, when it comes to forecasting, here's like a simple sales example. We're always on our reps to like, make sure that forecast is accurate. I can't go to the board with like a number that's based on lies and nothing, so make sure that, that forecast is accurate. And so, but what happens in your mind is like, well, hold on a second. I can't, if the news is bad, I can't say it's bad because then people are going to lose confidence in me. I give this example when my kids were little and we would make waffles on Saturday morning. Oftentimes they would wake up early and they would get all the ingredients out and kind of be ready to go for, we make waffles. And so one Saturday morning, I hear this big thud from the kitchen and I come down and there's a bag of chocolate chips all over the floor and a chair that's been pushed up against like the cupboard, where the chocolate chips are stored up high. And I come down and I'm like, all right, like who did this? and I have, 3 kids on the couch looking guilty as hell,
Yeah.
but no one is saying, "Oh, it's me." I'm like, "Oh, so no one knows how this happened?" Now think about what's going on in the minds of my kids. They're thinking there's a consequence coming as a result
Yeah.
of this. So I don't want to own up to it. Now imagine if I took a step back and said, "Hey, kids, I'm not angry. I know accidents happen. I'm just hoping that maybe someone who was potentially involved with this little accident maybe would help me clean it up. That's all I want." And then I get
Yeah.
volunteers. Once they take the consequence away, people
Yeah.
feel safe. And so when it comes to forecasting, something just as simple as, "Hey team, when I step into the board meeting or the executive team or whatever it is, like we need to forecast because we make decisions back to transparency. We make decisions about the trajectory of the business, where to invest things, like how to hire people, spiffs and stuff, comp plans for you." And so, uh, as a leader, I just want to know what the forecast is. And if the forecast is bad, I'm okay with that. Like, it's better that I know it's bad and then we can do something about it. Right. But if you tell me it's good and then it turns out to be bad, or, I know there's some variability and some risk involved, like, be honest with me about the risk, because then I can help you. If you're not honest about it, then we end up making decisions based on lies, and that's not good for anyone. So, I want you to feel comfortable telling me the answer, right? And so if I can remove some of that consequence and create that circle of safety, emotional safety, psychological safety, all the other examples, Jason, you gave around feedback, and I have tons more in the book, are super important as well. But I give that as just a tangible example of something that sales leaders struggle with, which is like forecast accuracy and how do I get people to own up. If I create that circle of safety, then I'm going to have more accurate forecasts and more honest reps that give me opportunities to help them.
Yeah. I love that. Remove the consequence. So again, the theme of putting yourself in the other person's shoes. In the personal example you shared was a really good one because I could feel in that moment as you were talking about it. Oh, if that was my dad and that happened, I would be thinking, I'm about to get a spanking or something, back when that was more common. Um, so this emotional safety thing is interesting. Is there maybe one or two things that you have around, like, how do I know as a leader if I have emotional safety or if my team feels like there's emotional safety? How do I know, or maybe what are some red flags of things I may or may not be doing or may or may not be getting from my
Yeah.
team that would indicate that it's probably not as good as I think it is?
I think a lot of it comes down to almost your example that you shared around effort. Like, if I feel like my team is holding back or they're not being as productive as they should be, it could be because they're afraid of, experimenting or going all in. I tell this story in the book of a fellow who, back at Salesforce, he confided in me. I mean, this was kind of after the fact that, and we all have things that we're going through. He was a gay man, but he hadn't come out, at a certain point in time and told anyone. And he arrives at Salesforce, and he was telling me how he spent a lot of time and energy kind of putting up a facade. He didn't want people to
Yeah.
know because, how will people react and so on. And but then he said, everyone was very accepting and his manager was accepting, and he came out. He didn't even tell his family. He comes out to his family, and his family is supportive. And he's like, and my whole life changed. Now I can be like my real self at work. And I'm sitting there, I was thinking two things. Number one, I was going through my cancer journey at the time. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, I feel exactly like this kid does because I didn't tell anyone about the stuff I was going through either, and how much time and energy I spent just trying to kind of, conceal that and work around it. And then I was thinking, oh my gosh, like, think about how much energy this kid is putting into concealing his identity. And like, if I could just get some of that energy back to focus
Yeah.
on his job, oh my gosh, like, wouldn't that be transformative? Right. And that's the narrative
Yeah.
he told me. And so I think, when everything was, out in the open, oh my gosh, now it's like, I can be much more productive. So I think if you feel your team is holding back, if they're not trying as hard as they can, if your forecasts aren't accurate, like things just aren't feeling right, it could be that there's this lack of psychological safety on the team. One of the other examples I give, though, of protecting and advocating is something really simple. I call this the one sentence advocacy builder, which is funny because it's also like a great discovery question. There's a lot of overlap between sales and sales
Yeah.
leadership.
Of
But I
course.
say, go to your team and just ask them to complete this sentence. I could sell more of our products and services this quarter, this year, this month, whatever it is, if, what's the if, Jason? Like,
Yeah.
what's the one thing that's holding you back? And it's also an opportunity for coaching, right? Because if you say something dumb like, oh, if the economy was better, okay, then I can kind of coach around that. But oftentimes when people, leaders, they ask these questions, they hear things that they can very easily do to remove the
Yeah.
roadblock for their team that they just didn't know because they never asked. And even something as simple as that, asking what I can do to clear roadblocks for you and then doing it, is huge in terms of that feeling of protection and advocacy.
Yeah. The way that that question is phrased also is so important because, what feedback do you have from me? How can I make your job easier? That requires like a lot of risk from a person to give their boss feedback. There's a power dynamic there. I think that a lot of leaders sometimes don't acknowledge that they have and that there is fear, of consequences. Let's keep going. So
Mhm.
we have promoting transparency, protecting and advocating. The third one is driving accountability. This is a
Mhm.
really interesting one because I don't know, in the conversations you have with leaders, I feel like do you hear that accountability? It's almost like a dirty word that people don't want to use. They kind of confuse it with micromanagement.
Mhm.
So that might be a good place to start. What's the difference between accountability and micromanagement?
Yeah, it's not like, hey Jason, where are you with those 37 calls? You said you were going to make 37. How you doing on that? Like, it's not.
Yeah.
That is in part what it is. It's honoring the commitments we make to each other, doing what we said we're going to do. But there's so much more to it than micromanaging. Like, for example, and we've kind of already talked about this in the context of transparency, but that's why it's skill number 3 and we build up to it. Is I say, like, it's very difficult for me to hold you accountable for something. Like, for example, keeping your forecast up to date, or delivering the corporate pitch in a good way, or making a certain number of calls. If I've never really shown you or told you what the gold standard, or what I say good looks like, right? So if I say, Jason, that pitch that I've listened to your Gong recording, like that pitch sucked, and like you did A, B, and C, it's very difficult for me to hold you accountable for something when I never showed you what it should sound like to begin with. So when I talk about accountability, it's not just the act of holding you to account and saying, hey, Jason, where are the calls? It's the journey along the way and doing things like showing you what good looks like. It's also things like sharing accountability across the team. So, for example, one of the things I talk about was I was in a situation at Salesforce where my region expanded from 5 teams to 7 teams. But I was lacking a leader for one of those 2 new teams. And so in the meantime, I was in Toronto, the team was in New York, and I was managing those reps directly while I was, trying to hire the leader, in addition to the 6 other managers in the region as a whole. So I felt I was doing all these jobs and not doing them particularly, well. And so I said, what I'm going to do? Let's share the responsibility here. There's a lot of things that we need to do
Yeah.
in terms of the team, forecasts, keeping them up to date, customer events, spiffs, social events. Do people want to take on some of these responsibilities? Like, I don't need to do them, right? And so we gave the reps opportunity to wear different hats across the team. Some of the ones were things that, like, I said, hey, look, I need help on. Some of the things were things that they came up with that I had never thought of that should be jobs in the team, and they took on those responsibilities. And so part of when I say driving accountability, it's not just like top down, Jason, you got to do this stuff, but rather, like, let's share some of the accountability across the team, and let's take on roles so you feel accountable to each other, not just to me. So yeah, accountability is a lot more than just, like, to your point, like the micromanaging. I mean, it's not micromanaging, but there's lots of different ways that we can get people to do what they said they were going to do, and improve that across the team.
Yeah, pure accountability, I feel like is so powerful. So much more powerful than, oh, I don't want to let down my boss or whatever it might be. It's the same I feel like it's very similar to what you get in sports or like I go to Orange Theory. Uh there is sort of an accountability aspect in that on the TV it shows everyone what your heart rate is and how many calories have you've burned and what your heart rate is on the monitor. There's a level of peer pressure, at least for
Mm-hmm.
me, because I'm somewhat competitive, that I feel going to a class where there are other people pushing themselves. How much of that is a part of this too? With because you mentioned something, deputizing people on your team. What I kind of thought of when I saw that was, really having those conversations with the people on the team that are those future leaders and letting them know that people look up to them and see them as an example. And it does create positive peer pressure on the team when they share things, when we're public about performance and all that kind of stuff. But what are your thoughts on that?
100%. It's funny, one of the things I talk about in the accountability chapter is very much like your Orange Theory dashboard, which is what I refer to as letting the data do the hard work. So in your
Yeah.
Orange Theory class, the trainer could come around like, okay, come on, Jason, you got to keep your heart rate up. But like,
Yeah.
they don't have to do that because there's a dashboard that shows all that stuff and it's very obvious to everyone. And there's no feeling in that dashboard. It's like, here's just what it is. So I often say like one of the easiest ways to drive accountability is to make sure that in your CRM or wherever you're using that you have dashboards and reports set up to drive the behaviors you're looking to drive and to help you have some of those difficult conversations. So I shouldn't have to show up to a one-on-one and say, hey, Jason, I'm looking here at the numbers and the numbers are saying like you're not putting in the right amount of effort because that's already, everyone knows that. It's something that's already there. So I say, let the data do the hard work, make sure that your dashboards and reports are available, visible, and drive the behaviors that you're trying to drive. So I'd say to people, take a step back, think about what's the kind of behavior you're trying to drive on your team with respect to accountability, and then make sure that your dashboards, reports, and so on reflect that and are visible in the right ways, just like your Orange Theory. I think that's great.
Yeah. The prep for a one-on-one, the thing that I've seen a lot of leaders, I always used to do this as a sales manager too, was part of like they would fill like a Google Doc, let's say, right, as part of the prep for the one-on-one, and I would submit it to you, my manager. And part of that is going onto the dashboard and you're pulling your stats. It's like as a manager, yes, I can see your stats, but it's like the act of you looking at the dashboard and like putting in your performance and your thoughts on your performance and what went well and what didn't go well, like is a certain part of this empowering the person to really feel like, hey, this is your sales pipeline. When you're coming into a meeting, it's not just to necessarily do double work and copy and paste what's in a dashboard. It's for you to have awareness around this and for you to be thinking about what could or couldn't have gone better or what to improve, etc. How do you think about that part of it as a leader, empowering the people that work for you? Because there's nothing better than a rep that, or any employee that just takes 100% accountability over their performance and their development, and they do most of the meeting prep. Like
Mm-hmm.
they treat it like their meeting, I guess is where what I'm kind of getting to. What are your thoughts on kind of that perspective, and how do we get the people that work for us to really feel more empowered and to take more ownership?
Yeah, 100%. Well, it's funny. So, skill number 4, not to unnecessarily lead into it, is talking about coaching, which is the biggest chapter. And there's so much nuance to coaching. I know we probably can't do
Yeah.
it justice in a few minutes. But one of the things I talk a lot about is as a coach, we need a way of diagnosing what we're going to coach you on. Like, what I'm going to work on with Jason to get better. And there's a couple of different ways to do that. Number one is like I can put you through the X-ray machine. Like there's a diagnostic element where like I can use data to figure out where you're going off the rails, and I have a whole formula and approach that I talk about in the book to do that. And the second way is the bottom up. Like I do it almost like I'm doing discovery on a customer, where there's like a coaching element where I'm asking questions and getting answers, because there's only so much I can learn. I can put someone through the X-ray machine, but I need to ask them how they feel and how it works and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
But with these systems in place, it should be a lot easier for an individual to self-diagnose what might be going wrong. And, when you come to me and we're listening to the call and like, hey, Jason, let's listen to this call together, or you listen to it in advance, coming back with, okay, like, where do you think, you could have done better? Is either something that you can see systematically through the data. It's something that you want to create a degree of self-awareness in as for the rep. So I think it's huge. If you have the right systems and tools in place, it should be very easy, or at least easier, for reps to come prepared with a perspective and point of view on self-diagnosing. Now, look, it doesn't mean that they'll never need the outside coach, because you even see this in sports. It's very difficult to figure out what you're doing wrong with your swing when you're in the middle of it. You need someone to
Yep.
take a look. But yeah, self-diagnosis, I would say, is a huge part if you have those systems in place.
It's so big too to create the system. The best systems I've seen, if I use outbound as an example, is like where a rep can basically look at not the number of meetings that they're booking. Let's say if it's an account executive, it's, looking back at where do my meetings come from? When I get someone live on a call, what's the booking rate of a live cold call versus people that reply to an email? Like getting kind of granular so that someone could self coach, and then creating a system where when someone sees a problem that they're having, there's like prescriptive ways for them to start helping themselves, which I think is just, it's such a great place to get to. I want to make sure we got time for the last one.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, make sure that you guys go pick up the book too, Sales Leader They Need, because the coaching section there's so many goodies in there that we could do multiple podcasts just on the coaching section because it's such a deep topic. Um, Getting and giving feedback.
Yes.
So, um, I'm a sales leader. I have to have a hard conversation with someone around something that they are doing that is making them not achieve the results that they would like to achieve. And an example of something, I've seen so many things where there's almost like a person that talks too much on sales calls. We're giving them that feedback. It's like that could be taken so personally.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like a personality quirk that they have that might be making them not do well. But how do you think about having the hard conversation and doing that from a place that has some compassion in it versus just being really cold and tearing someone apart and doing something that would be really unproductive? Like, how do you have that conversation in a way that might uplift someone and have them leaving feeling inspired versus really beaten down?
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, it's interesting. So the chapter I talk about getting and giving feedback, and I say intentionally in that order, because I reckon it's a lot more important for us as leaders to get feedback about
Yeah.
how we're doing, how our operation is doing, not just so that we can get the feedback and actually improve and get better, but because getting feedback and the frequency with which we get that feedback creates the perception on the part of our teams that we're getting better, because we don't
Yeah.
get better. I'm totally, stealing this from Marshall Goldsmith, who's brilliant on this. He says we don't get better when our behaviors change. We get better when our behaviors are perceived by others to have
Yeah.
changed. So it's not just that things need to be good. People need to feel that change is happening. So I say getting is really important. Setting that aside for a second, the giving piece, one of the things I talk about, I mean, there's a simple system for giving feedback. I didn't invent it, but I talk about it in the book, which is, highlight the behavior, highlight the implications of the behavior, make suggestions as to, what the person might do to improve. But I'd say like the biggest thing out of all of that in terms of making sure people don't take it personally is to just take the emotion out of it. We often
Yeah.
would have that conversation at Salesforce. Conversations can get very heated, even between sales leaders, territory disputes and so on.
Yeah.
My boss, who was great, would often, and I remember this mantra, he would just like, take the emotion out of it. Let's just pretend like we're two robots talking to each other and we're just like spitting facts and like there's nothing personal about it. Here's what I saw. Here was the impact of the behavior. Like just keep it really simple is a great way of not introducing undue emotion into the conversation.
So it kind of comes back to the data piece that you mentioned before around a rep's performance. It's just being very real about the dollars and cents really that are on the dashboard. What do the numbers show us?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, look, a lot of it is the precursor to the numbers. Like to your point, when on the prospecting call, when you introduce yourself like this, the customers, they didn't convert it and want the next meeting. When you did it like this, they did. Like Jason,
Mhm.
like why do you think that is? Like, it's also an opportunity for me
Yeah.
to practice some of my coaching skills as it relates to feedback. That's why the skills as I kind of go through the book are cumulative in a way.
Yeah. Love it. So transparency, if we kind of review the five again, promoting transparency, protecting and advocating, driving accountability, coaching your team, getting and giving playbook, getting and giving feedback.
Mm-hmm.
um, Good stuff, David. So make sure to check out the book, Sales Leader They Need. I thought this was a really great read. It's one of those books that in your previous book was like this too, where there's a lot of why behind stuff
Mm-hmm.
coupled with a lot of just very tactical things that literally you could just start using in your next one-on-one as a leader. So go make sure to check it out. Anything else you want to let us know? Anything else that people should look for in the book, maybe that we didn't talk about, just to get people excited to go check it out?
No, look, I say this is a really hard job. If you're a sales leader, you know, especially, and I say sales leader specifically, the hardest job in business, because you're managing people, which is always tough. But then you have the added responsibility of revenue and the quota pressure that comes with it. It's a really hard job. So I say, show yourself some grace. Just try to do one small thing at a time. Don't try to be, super manager all in one shot. Dedicate your time to the pursuit of knowledge and getting better at this craft, and recognize that, again, what got you here won't get you there. Just because you were a great rep does not mean you're going to be the best leader. Take it seriously, put in the reps, as they say, and just try to focus on one small thing at a time. That's my best advice.